I'm Qley, 28 years old. My brother Blake just took a crowbar to my brand new $50,000 Audi Q5. The front windshield is spiderwebbed, the hood has 3 massive dents, and both headlights are completely shattered. I stood there watching him destroy 2 years of saving, sacrifice, and 60-hour work weeks. Then I calmly pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely betrayed by family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. But let me back up and tell you how we got here, because this didn't start with a crowbar and my beautiful car in pieces. This started 3 years ago when I made the biggest mistake of my life, moving back home to help my parents after Dad's heart attack. I thought I was being the good daughter, the responsible one. I had no idea I was walking into a nightmare that would cost me everything I'd worked for. My parents, Richard and Susan Walker, had always favored Blake, but I told myself it was just because he was the baby, born when I was already 3. Blake could do no wrong in their eyes. When he got suspended from high school for drinking, they blamed peer pressure. When he crashed Dad's truck at 19, they said it was an accident. When he got fired from 3 jobs in 2 years, they insisted the employers were unreasonable. I, on the other hand, had been expected to excel at everything from the time I could walk. Straight A's weren't celebrated. They were the minimum requirement. My college scholarship wasn't an achievement. It was what any decent student should earn. When I landed my marketing position at a tech startup right after graduation, making more money than either of my parents ever had, they acted like I'd simply done what was expected. The contrast became even more obvious when I moved back home. I paid rent, bought groceries, helped with Dad's medical bills, and maintained the house. Blake lived rent-free, contributed nothing, and treated the place like his personal hotel. When he brought friends over for loud parties, I was told to be more understanding. When I asked for quiet during my work calls, I was being unreasonable. But I stayed. I stayed because Dad's health was fragile, because Mom seemed overwhelmed, and because some pathetic part of me still hoped that if I just tried hard enough, I could earn the same unconditional love they showered on Blake. That hope nearly destroyed me. The real turning point came last spring when Blake decided he wanted to go on a cross-country road trip with his unemployed friends. Not a problem in itself, except Blake expected our parents to fund it. When they couldn't afford the $5,000 he demanded, he threw what I can only describe as a tantrum. A 25-year-old man screaming at our 60-something parents about how they never supported his dreams. That's when he noticed my car. I'll never forget the look in Blake's eyes when he saw me pull into the driveway in my new Audi Q5. It was pure, undiluted envy mixed with something darker. Entitlement. I'd been saving for that car for 2 years, working overtime, skipping vacations, eating ramen for lunch more days than I care to count. But to Blake, success was something that just happened to other people, something he deserved without effort. "Nice ride, sis," he said, running his fingers along the pristine silver paint. "Must be nice having all that money." The way he said it made my skin crawl. Not congratulations, not acknowledgement of my hard work, just resentment that I had something he wanted. Mom immediately jumped to his defense, as always. "Blake's just going through a difficult time," she explained, as if being unemployed by choice at 25 was some kind of medical condition. "The job market is so competitive these days." The job market wasn't Blake's problem. His complete lack of work ethic was. But pointing that out would make me the villain, as usual. Dad, still recovering from his heart attack, tried to play peacemaker. Now, kids, we're all family here. We should support each other. Support. That was always the magic word in our house, but it only ever seemed to flow in one direction, toward Blake. When I needed support during my brutal finals week senior year, I was told to manage my stress better. When Blake needed support after getting evicted for not paying rent, the entire family mobilized to help him. The double standard was staggering, but I'd learned to live with it. What I hadn't expected was how the presence of my car would become a constant source of tension. Blake started making little comments every day. "Some people have all the luck," he'd mutter when I left for work. "Must be nice not having to worry about money," he'd say when I bought groceries. The passive aggression escalated when his road trip plans fell through due to lack of funds. Suddenly, every conversation became about how unfair life was, how some people got all the breaks while others struggled. He never said it directly, but the implication was clear. I should help him. I should hand over my hard-earned money to fund his adventure. When I didn't volunteer, he started dropping hints. "I bet that car payment is pretty steep," he'd say. "Probably more than most people make in a month." When hints didn't work, he moved to guilt. "It's just sitting in the driveway most of the time anyway. Seems wasteful." When guilt failed, he tried manipulation through our parents. Chloe's always been selfish, he told Mom one evening, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen. She's never cared about anyone but herself. This from the man who hadn't contributed a single dollar to household expenses in 3 years. Mom's response? She's just focused on her career, honey. Give her time. The gaslighting was incredible. I was selfish for not funding his vacation, but he wasn't selfish for expecting it. I was materialistic for buying a car with my own money, but he wasn't materialistic for wanting to take it. The mental gymnastics my family performed to justify Blake's behavior while criticizing mine would have been impressive if it weren't so devastating. But the real breaking point came when Blake started asking for the keys directly. The first time Blake asked to borrow my car, I was genuinely shocked. Not because he asked, I'd been expecting that, but because of how he asked. No explanation of where he was going, no mention of how long he'd need it, no acknowledgement that he was asking for a $50,000 favor. Just, hey, can I take your car tonight? Like he was asking to borrow a pen. I'm sorry, but no, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I need it for work tomorrow, and besides, you're not on my insurance. Both completely true statements. But Blake's face darkened like I'd just insulted his mother. Which, knowing my family, I probably had by extension. Are you serious right now? He asked, voice rising. It's just for one night. I've got a date, and my car's making that noise again. His car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic that our parents had bought him, was always making some kind of noise because Blake refused to maintain it. Oil changes were suggestions, tire rotations were optional, and brake maintenance was apparently beneath him. I said, no, Blake, it's not personal. But of course, to Blake, everything was personal. Any boundary was a personal attack. Any limit was a betrayal. He stormed out of the room, slamming his bedroom door so hard the pictures on the hallway wall rattled. Within an hour, Mom was knocking on my door. Honey, could you reconsider about the car? Blake really needs it tonight. The way she said it, you'd think it was a medical emergency instead of a date. He's been so depressed lately about the job situation. This might cheer him up. Mom, I'm not comfortable lending out my car. It's not just about tonight. It's about setting boundaries. I tried to explain that lending Blake my car would set a precedent I wasn't prepared to live with. Once he got comfortable using it, he'd expect access whenever he wanted. I'd seen this pattern with everything else he'd ever borrowed. You're being selfish, Qley. The words hit like a slap. Family helps family. Your grandmother would be ashamed of this attitude. Bringing up Grandma was a low blow, especially since Grandma had been the one person in our family who'd always encouraged my independence and success. But Mom had a selective memory when it came to Grandma's values. Dad tried a different approach. Princess, why don't you just let him use it this once? What's the harm? The harm was that there would never be just this once with Blake. There would be next time, and the time after that, and eventually I'd find myself without access to my own car whenever Blake had plans. I've already said no. Please respect that. I stood firm, even though every instinct I'd been raised with told me to give in, to keep the peace, to be the bigger person. But I'd been the bigger person my entire life, and where had it gotten me? Living in my childhood bedroom at 28, subsidizing a grown man's lifestyle while being called selfish for having boundaries. Blake didn't speak to me for 3 days after that. The silent treatment was supposed to punish me, make me feel guilty enough to apologize and hand over the keys. Instead, it was the most peaceful 3 days I'd had since moving back home. No snide comments, no passive-aggressive remarks, just blissful quiet. But I should have known it wouldn't last. Have you ever experienced family members who punish you for having boundaries? Let me know in the comments, because what Blake did next was going to test every limit I thought I had. The silent treatment ended abruptly on Thursday morning when I discovered Blake had taken my car anyway. I walked out to the driveway at 7 a.m., coffee in hand, ready for another day at the office, and my parking spot was empty. For a moment, I thought I was losing my mind. Had I moved it? Forgotten where I parked? Then I saw Blake's Honda sitting in the exact spot where my Audi should have been. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called him. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. On the third attempt, he finally picked up. What's up, sis? His voice was casual, cheerful even, like he hadn't just committed what was essentially theft. Where is my car, Blake? I kept my voice steady, but inside I was screaming. Oh, I borrowed it. Mine wouldn't start this morning, and I had an important meeting. An important meeting. Blake, who'd been unemployed for 6 months, suddenly had important meetings that justified taking my car without permission. You took my car without asking. That's stealing. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth. Was I really accusing my own brother of stealing? But what else would you call taking someone's property without consent? He laughed. Actually laughed. Relax, drama queen. It's not stealing when we're family. Besides, you can take my car if you need to go somewhere. His car that wouldn't start. His car that had a broken air conditioner, bald tires, and a transmission that sounded like a dying animal. He was offering me his broken-down Honda as compensation for stealing my Audi. Blake, bring my car back right now or I'm calling the police. I meant it. I was done playing games, done being the understanding sister while he walked all over me. You're not calling the police on your own brother over a car. Mom and Dad would never forgive you. There it was. The threat that had controlled my behavior my entire life. The fear of disappointing our parents, of being the bad guy, of disrupting the family harmony that only ever seemed to benefit Blake. But something had shifted in me. Maybe it was the casual way he'd violated my trust. Maybe it was his complete lack of remorse. Or maybe I'd just finally reached my limit. Watch me, I said, and hung up. I was reaching for my phone to dial 911 when Mom appeared in the doorway, already dressed for her job at the bank. Qley, honey, what's all the shouting about? Her tone was concerned but cautious, like she was approaching a dangerous animal. Blake stole my car. The words felt both dramatic and completely inadequate. How do you explain that your 25-year-old brother had committed a felony so casually, so carelessly that he'd answered the phone laughing? Mom's face fell, but not in the way I expected. She looked disappointed, but the disappointment seemed directed at me, not Blake. Stole is a very strong word, honey. He's your brother. I'm sure he just needed it for something important. He took my car without permission. That's the definition of stealing, Mom. I couldn't believe I was having to explain basic concepts of property rights to a grown woman who worked at a bank. Well, did you ask him why he needed it? Maybe there's a good reason. Always. Always. There had to be a good reason when Blake did something wrong. When I did something wrong, the reason didn't matter. Only the consequence. It doesn't matter why he needed it. He should have asked. I felt like I was speaking a foreign language. How was this controversial? How was, don't take things that don't belong to you? A radical position in my own family. Dad emerged from the bathroom, already dressed for his part-time job at the hardware store. His recovery from the heart attack had been slow, and he was still adjusting to the limitations of his new normal. What's all the commotion about, girls? Blake took Qley's car without asking, Mom explained, making it sound like a minor misunderstanding rather than theft. She's threatening to call the police. Dad's face went pale. The police? Qley, honey, you can't call the police on family. Think about what that would do to Blake's record. Think about what the neighbors would say. And there it was, the complete reversal of priorities that had defined my childhood. Blake's potential consequences mattered more than his actual crimes. The neighbors' opinions mattered more than my violated boundaries. Everyone's feelings mattered more than mine. Blake returned my car 3 hours later, pulling into the driveway like nothing had happened. I was working from home that day, a flexibility I'd negotiated specifically to help with Dad's medical appointments, when I heard the familiar sound of my engine. I watched from the living room window as he got out, tossed my keys onto the hood like they were trash, and walked toward the house. The casual disrespect of that gesture, treating my car keys like garbage, crystallized everything wrong with our family dynamic. I met him at the front door, my hand already extended for the keys he'd left on my car. "How was your important meeting?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm that I didn't bother to hide. Blake shrugged, not even pretending to look guilty. "Fine. Got the job, actually." He said it like this somehow justified everything, like his successful outcome retroactively made the theft acceptable. Good thing I had reliable transportation, or I might not have made it. The audacity was breathtaking. He was actually trying to make me feel like I should be grateful he'd stolen my car because it helped him get a job. You could have asked, Blake. You could have explained the situation. But instead, you just took what you wanted. And you would have said yes? He raised an eyebrow, already knowing the answer. I probably would have said no, and he was right to assume that. But that wasn't the point. That's not the point. The point is that it's my choice to make, not yours. I was struggling to keep my voice level, to maintain the composure that our family had always demanded from me while excusing Blake's tantrums. Whatever. It worked out fine. No harm, no foul. He started to walk past me, the conversation apparently over in his mind. But I wasn't done. "Blake, this can't happen again. I need your word that you won't take my car without permission." It felt ridiculous, asking a 25-year-old man to promise not to steal from me, but here we were. He turned back, his expression shifting from casual dismissal to something harder. "Or what? You'll call the cops on your own brother?" The way he said it made it clear he knew our parents would never let me follow through on that threat. "Yes," I said simply. "I will." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or the first hint that his little sister might not be the pushover he'd always assumed, but it was gone quickly, replaced by his usual smugness. Sure you will, sis. Sure you will. He disappeared into the house, leaving me standing on the porch with a sick feeling in my stomach. This wasn't over. In fact, I had the terrible feeling it was just beginning. That evening, Mom called a family meeting. We gathered in the living room like we were discussing vacation plans instead of addressing the fact that one family member had stolen from another. Dad sat in his recliner, Mom on the couch, Blake sprawled in the chair by the window, and me perched on the edge of the sofa like I was ready to flee. We need to talk about what happened today, Mom began, her voice taking on the patient tone she used for mediating disputes. This family can't function if we don't trust each other. The irony was stunning. Blake had violated my trust completely, but somehow, this was about all of us not trusting each other. I waited for someone to point out that trust was earned, that Blake had forfeited any right to the benefit of the doubt when he stole my car. I waited in vain. Qley, honey, I understand you're upset, Dad said, leaning forward slightly. But Blake apologized, and he got the job. Maybe we can see this as a learning experience and move forward. I looked around the room, waiting for someone to acknowledge that Blake hadn't actually apologized. He'd explained, justified, and dismissed, but he'd never once said he was sorry. But pointing this out would make me the difficult one, the one who couldn't let things go. I want Blake to promise he won't take my car again without asking, I said instead, focusing on the practical rather than the emotional. That's not unreasonable. Blake's new job, it turned out, was delivering food for an app-based service. Hardly the career opportunity that justified Grand Theft Auto, but our parents treated it like he'd been hired as CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Blake's really turning his life around, Mom said proudly. This job could lead to bigger things. Sure it could. Just like his previous 3 jobs could have led to bigger things. Before he got fired from each one for showing up late, calling in sick on busy days, or arguing with supervisors. But I was expected to smile and be supportive, to pretend this time was different. I'm happy Blake found work, I said carefully. But that doesn't change the fact that he took my car without permission. I need assurance it won't happen again. Blake rolled his eyes. Fine. I promise I won't take your precious car without asking. Happy now? The word precious was loaded with contempt, but at least I had his promise. I should have known it wasn't worth the breath he'd used to make it. Blake kept his promise for exactly 2 weeks. On a Friday night in late August, I came home from dinner with friends to find my car gone again. This time, Blake hadn't even bothered with the pretense of an emergency or important meeting. When I called him, he was at a bar across town with his unemployed friends, my car keys in his pocket like he owned them. I'll bring it back tomorrow, he said over the sound of loud music and laughter. Don't wait up. The casual dismissal in his voice told me everything I needed to know. He'd tested the boundaries, found them flexible, and now considered my car community property. Blake, you promised me 2 weeks ago that this wouldn't happen again. I was pacing the living room, my parents watching from the kitchen with expressions of weary resignation. And I've been good about it, haven't I? This is just one time. One time after 2 weeks somehow counted as keeping his promise in Blake's mind. The logic was so twisted I didn't know where to begin untangling it. Bring my car back right now, or I'm calling the police. I'd made this threat before, but this time felt different. I was tired of being the reasonable one, tired of being understanding, tired of enabling Blake's behavior by refusing to enforce consequences. You're not calling the cops over this, Qley. Stop being dramatic. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. He'd hung up on me. After stealing my car, he'd hung up on me. That's when I noticed Mom and Dad weren't looking surprised or outraged by Blake's behavior. They were looking uncomfortable, like they'd been expecting this conversation and dreading it. You knew he was going to take it again, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Honey, he mentioned he might need to borrow it tonight, Mom said carefully. I thought you two had worked it out. He mentioned it to you, but not to me. The betrayal was complete now. Not only had Blake stolen my car again, but he'd gotten permission from our parents first. Permission they had no right to give. We thought you wouldn't mind, Dad said weakly. It's just for one night, and he's been doing so well with his new job. It's my car. The words exploded out of me louder than I'd intended. You can't give permission for someone to use my property. That's not how ownership works. The look that passed between my parents told me everything. They didn't see it as my car. In their minds, I was still the child living in their house, and everything I owned was subject to family needs. Blake's wants trumped my rights, as always. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I walked to my room, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911. This time, I wasn't bluffing. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report a stolen vehicle. My voice was steady, calmer than I felt. Behind me, I could hear Mom gasp and Dad start to protest, but I kept talking. My brother took my car without permission. I have the license plate number and I know where he is. The next few minutes passed in a blur of questions from the dispatcher and increasingly frantic protests from my parents. Yes, I was sure I wanted to press charges. Yes, I understood this was my brother. Yes, I was certain the car had been taken without permission. By the time I hung up, Mom was crying and Dad looked like he was about to have another heart attack. "Qley, what have you done?" Mom whispered. "What have you done to our family?" What had I done? I'd finally stopped being a doormat. I'd finally enforced a boundary. I'd finally treated Blake like the adult he was supposed to be instead of the spoiled child everyone else insisted on enabling. But as I sat in my room waiting for the police to call back, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Because what I discovered the next morning would make Blake stealing my car look like a minor inconvenience. When the police finally located Blake and impounded my car, they found something that changed everything. Hidden in my trunk. Something that proved Blake hadn't just been borrowing my car for transportation. He'd been using it for something far worse. Something that could have destroyed my life along with his. But that's a story for tomorrow, because what the police found was just the tip of the iceberg. The police called me at 6 a.m. Saturday morning. "Miss Walker, we need you to come down to the impound lot. There's been a development with your vehicle." The officer's voice was professional but strained, like he was delivering news he didn't want to share. I threw on clothes and drove Dad's truck to the lot, my mind racing through possibilities. Had Blake damaged my car? Crashed it? Nothing could have prepared me for what Officer Martinez showed me when I arrived. "We found these in your trunk during the standard search," he said, gesturing to a table covered with evidence bags. Inside the clear plastic were small baggies of white powder, a digital scale, and what looked like several $1,000s in cash. "Do you have any knowledge of these items?" My legs nearly gave out. Blake hadn't just been borrowing my car for rides to the bar or job interviews. He'd been using it to deal drugs, storing his inventory in my trunk like his personal warehouse. "No," I whispered, staring at the evidence that could have sent me to prison. "I had no idea." "Your brother claims you were aware of his activities," Officer Martinez continued, watching my face carefully. "He says you were business partners." The words hit me like physical blows. Blake was trying to take me down with him, claiming I was complicit in crimes I'd never even suspected. "That's a lie." My voice was stronger now, fueled by rage. "I work in corporate marketing. I've never touched drugs in my life. You can test me right now if you want." The officer nodded, clearly believing me, but the damage was already done in my mind. My own brother had tried to frame me for his crimes. "We'll need you to come in for questioning later today," Officer Martinez said gently, "just to get your statement on record. But based on the location where we arrested your brother and the circumstances, we don't believe you were involved." I spent the rest of the morning in a daze, my phone buzzing constantly with calls from my parents. When I finally answered, Mom was hysterical. "Qley, you have to drop the charges. Blake made a mistake, but calling the police has made everything so much worse. He could go to prison. Mom, he was dealing drugs out of my car. I could have gone to prison." But even facing this revelation, she was more concerned about Blake's consequences than my near miss with a felony conviction. "He's your brother," she sobbed. "Family doesn't abandon family. Your grandmother would be rolling over in her grave. Again with Grandma, who'd actually taught me that love without accountability wasn't love at all." Dad tried a different approach when he called an hour later. "Princess, I know you're angry, but think about Blake's future. One mistake shouldn't ruin his whole life. One mistake. As if dealing drugs was an oopsie, a momentary lapse in judgment rather than a calculated criminal enterprise. Dad, this wasn't one mistake. This was an ongoing operation using my property without my knowledge. He tried to implicate me when he got caught. That's not a mistake. That's malicious." But logic bounced off my parents like water off a windshield. Their golden boy could do no wrong, even when caught red-handed. The questioning at the police station was straightforward. I explained the timeline of Blake taking my car, showed them bank records proving my legitimate income, and provided character references from my employer. Within 2 hours, they'd cleared me of any involvement and thanked me for my cooperation in building their case against Blake. But the real shock came when Detective Rodriguez pulled me aside afterward. "Miss Walker, your brother's case isn't just about simple possession. We've been tracking this distribution network for months. Your car was identified at multiple transaction locations. This is serious federal territory. Federal charges. Blake wasn't just facing a slap on the wrist for personal use. He was looking at years in prison for distribution across state lines. And he'd been doing it all with my car, making me an unwitting accomplice in a federal investigation. When I got home that evening, my parents were waiting with Blake's girlfriend, Jessica, and her parents. An intervention, apparently, to convince me to drop the charges and save the family. Because somehow, I was the one tearing the family apart by refusing to enable Blake's criminal behavior. "Qley, please," Jessica begged, her eyes red from crying. "Blake made a mistake, but he loves you. He never meant for you to get involved." Never meant for me to get involved? He'd used my car as his drug mobile and tried to frame me when he got caught. If that wasn't involving me, I didn't know what was. What do you think will happen next? Will Qley stand firm against the family pressure, or will she cave to their demands? Let me know your predictions in the comments below. The intervention lasted 3 hours and accomplished nothing except crystallizing my resolve. 6 adults sat in our living room, taking turns explaining why I should sacrifice my integrity to protect Blake from consequences he'd earned. The mental gymnastics were Olympic level. "Think about the family reputation," Jessica's mother pleaded. "What will people think when this gets out?" The family reputation. Blake had been dealing drugs for months, possibly years, but I was the one damaging our reputation by reporting it. "Blake's always looked up to you," Dad said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You're supposed to be the responsible one, the one who protects the family. Protect the family by enabling criminal behavior and risking my own freedom." That was his definition of responsibility. "He's young," Mom added. "People make mistakes at his age. Don't ruin his life over this." Blake was 25, not 15. At his age, I'd been supporting myself, paying taxes, and building a career. But apparently, age was relative when it came to accountability. I listened to it all with growing amazement at their collective delusion. Not once did anyone express concern for what Blake's actions had put me through. Not once did anyone acknowledge that using my car for drug dealing was a massive violation of trust. Not once did anyone suggest that maybe, just maybe, Blake should face consequences for his choices. "I'm not dropping the charges," I said finally, cutting through Jessica's tearful monologue about Blake's good heart. "He committed serious crimes using my property. He tried to implicate me when he got caught. I will not protect him from the results of his own actions." The room erupted. Mom burst into fresh tears, Dad started pacing, and Jessica's parents began talking over each other about family loyalty and Christian forgiveness. Through it all, I sat calmly, watching the people who were supposed to love me try to convince me to sacrifice myself for someone who'd gladly thrown me under the bus. "You're being vindictive," Mom accused, her tears turning to anger. "This isn't about justice. This is about revenge. You've always been jealous of Blake." Jealous of Blake. The irony was staggering. I was jealous of a 25-year-old drug dealer who lived with his parents and had never held a job for more than 6 months. I was jealous of someone who'd just tried to frame me for federal crimes. The delusion was complete. "I'm done with this conversation," I announced, standing up. "Blake made his choices. Now he gets to live with them. I'm not responsible for protecting him from reality." I went to my room and started packing. If my family wanted to choose Blake over basic human decency, they could have him. I was done being the family scapegoat. Done being the responsible one who cleaned up everyone else's messes, done sacrificing my well-being for people who'd abandoned me the moment it became convenient. Within an hour, I'd packed everything that mattered into my car, the car that had been returned to me after the police finished processing it as evidence. The irony wasn't lost on me that Blake's criminal activities had finally freed me from the trap of family obligation. Mom knocked on my door as I was loading the last box. "Honey, where are you going? You can't just leave." I could hear the panic in her voice. Without me, who would pay the extra bills? Who would handle Dad's medical appointments? Who would be the responsible one while Blake worked through his difficult time in federal prison? "I'm going to live my own life," I told her. Not unkindly, but with finality. "You've made it clear that Blake's wants matter more than my rights. I'm not willing to live that way anymore." "But we're family," she protested, the magic word that had controlled my behavior for 28 years. "Family doesn't abandon family." "You're right," I agreed. Family doesn't abandon family, but they also don't enable criminal behavior. And they don't ask innocent members to take the fall for guilty ones. When you're ready to be actual family instead of Blake's enablers, you know where to find me. I hugged Dad goodbye. He looked shell-shocked by the evening's events, and drove away from the house that had never really felt like home. In my rearview mirror, I could see Mom standing in the doorway, probably wondering how her plan to guilt me into compliance had backfired so spectacularly. I spent that night in a hotel downtown, finally allowing myself to process what had happened. Blake wasn't just irresponsible or immature. He was a criminal who'd been willing to destroy my life to save his own. My parents weren't just playing favorites. They were actively asking me to sacrifice my freedom and future for someone who saw me as expendable. The next morning brought a flurry of texts and missed calls from various family members. Blake's grandmother, his childhood friends, even his ex-girlfriend from high school. Everyone had apparently been recruited to convince me to do the right thing. The desperation was palpable, and it told me everything I needed to know about how serious Blake's legal situation really was. The most revealing message came from my cousin Sarah, Blake's age and his longtime defender. "Qley, I can't believe you're doing this to Blake. He always said you were jealous of him, but I never thought you'd go this far. You're destroying him out of spite. Jealous." There was that word again. According to my family, my refusal to enable Blake's criminal behavior stemmed from jealousy rather than basic self-preservation. The narrative they'd constructed was remarkable in its complete disconnection from reality. I forwarded Sarah's message to Detective Rodriguez, along with several others that seemed designed to pressure me into dropping charges. "Miss Walker?" He called me back within an hour. "Are you being harassed about your testimony?" "Harassed might be too strong a word," I said carefully. "But there's definitely pressure from family members to drop the charges. I didn't want to create more legal problems for people who were, in their twisted way, trying to protect someone they loved. We see this a lot in family cases," Detective Rodriguez said gently. "People often feel more loyalty to the perpetrator than the victim. Don't let them make you feel guilty for doing the right thing." The victim. It hit me that I was the victim in this situation, not Blake. I was the one whose property had been used for crimes. I was the one who'd been placed at risk of federal prosecution. I was the one whose trust had been shattered. But somehow, my family had made Blake the victim and me the villain. That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. "Qley, it's Blake." His voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. None of the usual swagger or entitlement. "Can we talk?" "I don't think that's a good idea, Blake. You should probably go through your lawyer." I wasn't trying to be cruel, but I also wasn't naive enough to think this was a genuine attempt at reconciliation. "Please, just 5 minutes. I need to explain." The desperation in his voice almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the drugs in my trunk and his attempt to implicate me, and the sympathy evaporated. "Explain what? That you used my car to deal drugs? That you tried to frame me when you got caught? That you put my entire future at risk for your illegal activities?" Each question landed like a physical blow, judging by his sharp intake of breath. "I never meant for you to get in trouble," he said weakly. "I panicked when they arrested me. I wasn't thinking clearly." "You weren't thinking clearly for months while you used my car as your mobile drug lab." Blake. This wasn't a moment of panic. This was a pattern of behavior. I was surprised by how calm I sounded, how little emotion I felt towards someone who'd once meant the world to me. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But please, Qley, I'm begging you. Drop the charges. I'll go to rehab. I'll get counseling. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't let them send me to prison." The plea might have worked 6 months ago, back when I still believed that love meant protecting people from consequences. But I'd learned something important in the last few days. Real love sometimes means letting people face the results of their choices. "Blake, I hope you get the help you need. I really do. But I'm not dropping the charges. What you did was serious, and pretending it wasn't won't help anyone." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking slightly from the conversation. Within minutes, my phone was ringing again. Mom, Dad, Jessica's parents, the whole cavalry mobilized because Blake's personal appeal had failed. I turned off my phone and went for a walk, needing air and space to think. That's when I realized I wasn't just walking away from Blake's criminal activities. I was walking away from 28 years of being the family's designated problem solver, the one who sacrificed her own needs for everyone else's comfort. And for the first time in my adult life, that felt like freedom. 3 weeks later, I was settling into my new apartment across town when Detective Rodriguez called with news that changed everything. "Miss Walker, we need to meet. There's been a significant development in your brother's case." I met him at a coffee shop downtown, away from prying eyes and family drama. The detective looked grim as he slid a folder across the table. "We've been investigating your brother's drug operation more thoroughly. What we found is going to shock you." Inside the folder were bank records, transaction logs, and surveillance photos spanning the last 2 years. Blake's drug dealing wasn't the small-time operation I'd imagined. It was a sophisticated network moving serious quantities of narcotics across 3 states. And the financial records showed something that made my stomach drop. "Your brother has been using your identity," Detective Rodriguez said quietly. "Credit cards, bank accounts, even rental agreements, all in your name, all tied to his criminal activities." The words hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been working 60-hour weeks to save for my car, Blake had been systematically stealing my identity to fund his drug empire. Credit cards I'd never applied for, bank accounts I'd never opened, loans I'd never signed, all bearing my name and social security number. "How much?" I whispered, afraid to hear the answer. "Total exposure is approximately $200,000 in fraudulent debt. Your credit score has been destroyed. There are liens against property you don't own and warrant requirements for arrests you never committed." The detective's voice was gentle but direct. "Your brother didn't just use your car, Miss Walker. He's been using your entire identity for criminal activities." I stared at the documents, trying to process the magnitude of Blake's betrayal. He hadn't just violated my trust. He'd stolen my entire financial future. Every late payment, every missed loan payment, every criminal transaction had been reported under my name and social security number. "The good news," Detective Rodriguez continued, "is that we can prove identity theft with these records. The bad news is that clearing your name is going to take years and cost thousands in legal fees. Years, thousands of dollars, all because my brother had decided my identity was his personal piggy bank for funding drug deals." I thought about all the times my family had called me selfish for setting boundaries, all the guilt trips about not supporting Blake enough. If they only knew how much I'd been supporting him without even realizing it. "There's more," the detective said, pulling out another set of documents. "We found communications between your brother and his dealers discussing you specifically. They knew about your work schedule, your routines, your legitimate income. Blake had been feeding them information about your life to make the identity theft more convincing." The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I felt physically sick. Blake hadn't just stumbled into using my identity. He'd systematically studied my life to better exploit it. Every family dinner where I'd mentioned work projects, every casual conversation about my schedule, every detail I'd shared as a loving sister had been weapons he'd used against me. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Because Blake's lawyer is claiming his sister was the mastermind behind the operation. He's saying you recruited him to use his car while you handled the financial side." Detective Rodriguez watched my face carefully. "With the identity theft evidence, we know that's impossible. But we wanted you to know what he's claiming before you hear it from his legal team." Blake was trying to frame me again, but this time the evidence was overwhelmingly in my favor. Every fraudulent account, every stolen transaction, every criminal communication proved that I was the victim, not the perpetrator. But the fact that he'd even attempt such a massive lie showed how completely he'd written me off as expendable. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Blake's lawyer wants to meet with you. Please consider it. He has important information about the case." Important information, probably about Blake's latest attempt to scapegoat me for his own crimes. "I assume his family doesn't know about the identity theft yet?" Detective Rodriguez said, noting my phone. "You might want to prepare for their reaction when this becomes public." I laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "Detective, my family has spent 3 weeks trying to convince me that I'm the villain for reporting Blake's drug dealing. When they find out he's been stealing my identity for years, they'll probably say I should have given him permission. The family meeting to discuss Blake's new legal strategy was held at my parents' house without me. I only learned about it when Jessica called, sobbing, to tell me about Blake's latest bombshell. "Qley, Blake's lawyer says there's evidence you were involved in the drug dealing. He says Blake was just the delivery person and you were running everything behind the scenes. Jessica, Blake stole my identity for 2 years. Every fraudulent transaction, every criminal account, every illegal activity was done using my name without my knowledge. I'm the victim here, not the criminal. But even with documented proof of identity theft." Jessica seemed unsure. "Blake swears he didn't know about any identity theft. He says his lawyer must be wrong about that evidence." The willful blindness was staggering. Jessica would rather believe that federal investigators had fabricated evidence than accept that her boyfriend was a calculating criminal. "Jessica, the FBI doesn't fabricate bank records. Blake opened accounts in my name, took loans in my name, and conducted criminal business in my name. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's systematic identity theft." But I could hear in her voice that she wasn't really listening. "Can you just meet with Blake's lawyer? Please? Just to clear up any confusion?" The request was presented as reasonable. But I knew it was actually an attempt to find weaknesses in my story, or get me to say something that could be twisted in Blake's favor. I'll meet with Blake's lawyer, I agreed. But my attorney will be present, and everything will be recorded. The sharp intake of breath told me this wasn't what Jessica had expected. Your attorney? Qley, you're treating Blake like he's some stranger who attacked you. He's your brother. Again with the family magic word, as if sharing DNA somehow excused criminal behavior and identity theft. Jessica, my brother stole my identity to fund drug dealing and then tried to frame me for his crimes. At what point does family loyalty become self-destruction? But she'd already hung up, probably to report back that I was being unreasonable and vindictive. The meeting with Blake's lawyer was scheduled for Friday afternoon at the Federal Building downtown. My attorney, Rebecca Chen, met me beforehand to prepare. Your brother's strategy is clear, she explained. He's going to claim you were the criminal mastermind and he was just following orders from his older, more successful sister. But the evidence shows he stole my identity. How can he claim I was involved when every transaction was fraudulent? The logic seemed impossible to twist. But Blake had surprised me before with his capacity for denial and manipulation. He's claiming the identity theft evidence is fabricated, that you created false documents to frame him after you had a falling out over the business. Rebecca shook her head at the audacity. It's a desperate strategy, but desperate people try desperate things. Blake's lawyer, David Morrison, was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive suit, practiced smile, and the kind of confidence that comes from defending criminals for a living. Blake sat beside him, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, his usual swagger replaced by the pale complexion of someone facing serious federal time. Miss Walker, Morrison began, my client is prepared to testify that you initiated the drug distribution operation and recruited him as your delivery person. He's willing to cooperate fully with federal investigators about your role in this criminal enterprise. The accusation was so outrageous that I almost laughed. Mr. Morrison, your client stole my identity for 2 years to fund criminal activities. Every piece of evidence points to him as the perpetrator and me as the victim. This isn't a credible defense strategy, it's character assassination. Blake has provided detailed information about how you recruited him, how you managed the financial aspects, and how you used your legitimate job as cover for money laundering activities. Morrison slid a thick folder across the table. This is just a preliminary overview of his testimony. I glanced at the folder without opening it. Mr. Morrison, I assume you've reviewed the evidence showing that your client opened bank accounts in my name, applied for credit cards using my information, and conducted transactions using my stolen identity. How do you reconcile that with his claims? My client maintains that those accounts were opened at your direction, and that the identity theft allegations are fabricated. Morrison's confidence never wavered, even while making claims that contradicted documented evidence. Rebecca leaned forward. Mr. Morrison, are you seriously arguing that Miss Walker stole her own identity to frame your client? Because that's what you're describing. I'm arguing that Miss Walker created the appearance of identity theft to distance herself from criminal activities when the investigation got too close. Morrison looked directly at me. My client is prepared to testify that you taught him how to use false identification and conducted business under assumed names. The meeting continued for another hour, with Morrison presenting increasingly elaborate theories about my alleged criminal mastermind status. According to Blake's new version of events, I'd recruited him into drug dealing, managed all financial aspects, and created the identity theft evidence as an insurance policy in case we got caught. Blake himself never spoke during the meeting, avoiding eye contact while his lawyer painted me as a criminal genius who'd manipulated her innocent younger brother into a life of crime. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I felt almost numb to it. As we left the building, Rebecca shook her head in amazement. In 20 years of criminal defense, I've never seen someone try to frame their own victim quite so blatantly. Your brother isn't just desperate, he's delusional if he thinks this strategy will work. But I knew Blake better than Rebecca did. This wasn't desperation or delusion. This was Blake doing what he'd always done. When consequences threatened, blame someone else. When accountability loomed, point fingers at anyone nearby. When reality became inconvenient, create a new version where he was the victim. The only difference now was that the stakes were federal prison instead of family disappointment. The trial lasted 6 weeks, and every day brought new revelations about the depth of Blake's criminal activities and the extent of his betrayal. The prosecution methodically dismantled his defense, presenting evidence that proved beyond doubt that I was the victim of systematic identity theft, not a criminal mastermind. Bank surveillance footage showed Blake alone opening accounts in my name. Digital forensics proved that all communications about criminal activities came from Blake's devices. Financial records demonstrated that he'd been stealing my identity for over 2 years, long before any alleged falling out between us. Most damaging of all was Blake's own text message history, recovered from his phone, showing conversations with dealers where he bragged about using his stupid sister's credit and identity because she never pays attention to her finances anyway. The jury read those messages, saw Blake's own words calling me stupid for trusting him, and understood exactly who the real victim was. My parents attended every day of the trial, sitting behind Blake in a show of support that made national news. "Family stands by drug dealer son, abandons victim daughter," read one particularly harsh headline. But even facing public scrutiny, they couldn't bring themselves to acknowledge Blake's guilt or my victimhood. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts: drug distribution, identity theft, money laundering, and fraud. Blake showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but I saw Mom collapse in tears and Dad age 10 years in 10 seconds. They'd spent so much energy protecting Blake from consequences that they'd never prepared for the possibility that consequences might be unavoidable. Sentencing came 2 weeks later, 15 years in federal prison with possibility of parole in 8. The judge was particularly harsh about the identity theft aspect, noting that Blake had systematically destroyed his sister's financial future to fund criminal activities, then attempted to frame her for his own crimes. As Blake was led away in handcuffs, he finally looked at me directly for the first time since the trial began. No remorse, no apology, just cold hatred for the sister who'd refused to take the fall for his crimes. In that moment, I realized that the brother I'd loved and protected had never really existed. The real Blake was a calculating criminal who'd seen me as nothing more than a convenient target. The years since have been about rebuilding everything Blake destroyed. My credit, my finances, my ability to trust people, all had to be painstakingly reconstructed from scratch. The identity theft recovery process took 3 years and cost nearly $50,000 in legal fees, but I eventually cleared my name completely. My relationship with my parents never recovered. They moved to Florida shortly after Blake's sentencing, unable to face the neighbors who'd watched their golden boy get led away in handcuffs. We exchange Christmas cards now, stilted communications that carefully avoid mentioning Blake, or the trial, or the years of enabling that led to our family's destruction. I've built a new life that's entirely my own. New city, new job, new circle of friends who value honesty and accountability. I met David at a support group for identity theft victims, and we've been together for 2 years now. He understands the importance of trust because he's lived through betrayal too. Sometimes people ask if I regret calling the police on Blake, if I feel guilty about his prison sentence. The answer is always no. Blake made his choices, and protecting him from consequences would have enabled more victims and more crimes. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone's destruction of themselves and others. Blake will be eligible for parole next year. I won't be writing any letters of support or attending any hearings. That chapter of my life ended the day I chose my own well-being over family dysfunction. I learned that real family doesn't ask you to sacrifice yourself for their comfort, and real love doesn't require you to enable destructive behavior. My story isn't unique. Millions of people struggle with toxic family dynamics and the pressure to prioritize loyalty over safety. But I want everyone facing similar situations to know that you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You don't have to sacrifice your integrity to maintain relationships that require you to abandon your principles. The most powerful thing I ever learned was that walking away from toxicity isn't giving up on family. It's finally choosing yourself. And sometimes, choosing yourself is the bravest thing you can do. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family betrayal and building the life you deserve. Your support helps me continue sharing these difficult but important experiences, and remember, you're stronger than you know, and you deserve better than settling for people who see you as expendable. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that healing is possible, boundaries are healthy, and choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival.